Well, let's bring in South Carolina Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace. She just recently returned from Poland, where she got a firsthand look at this crisis. Congressman, thanks for taking time to debrief us today. Tell us everything, really. Tell us what you saw, what people on the ground there told you, what your lasting impression is.
Well, I can tell you from a firsthand watching and witnessing what was happening in Poland with millions of Ukrainian refugees, I saw an inspiring display of humanity. And you don't see refugee camps all over Poland, but you do see after a few days after they're in processing into the country, Polish families are opening their homes and welcoming these refugees, mostly women and kids, because their husbands and fathers stayed back in Ukraine to fight for their homeland, to fight for their freedom, and defend their democracy. It's an amazing display of courage and assistance and humanity, and it really put me and everyone that was on that visit in tears.
Take a listen to what President Biden said about the humanitarian crisis just a few moments ago.
We're prepared to provide another $1 billion, as the ambassador pointed out, $1 billion for those who fled and those who are affected around the world as a consequence of the negative impact of this war on food security. The bad news is they're in the breadbasket of the world, Ukraine and Russia. But we, the United States, are going to do our part because we're the third largest producer of wheat in the world.
Congresswoman, is $1 billion going to make a difference?
Well, it's hard to say at this point. I can tell you, in looking at what's happened over the last 4 weeks, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, obviously the humanitarian crisis is top of mind for everybody and all of my constituents that I talk to and meet with every day, including today. But the supply chain issues will be exacerbated. For instance, 90% of the world's neon comes from Ukraine. About a third of all the wheat and barley in the world comes from Russia and Ukraine. The amount and abundance of natural resources will affect everything in the way that either food is produced or the way that goods are made around the world. And I'm glad to see that President Biden has finally admitted what everyone knows. There are already supply chain and food shortages when you go to the grocery store. I saw it this week when I came back from Poland and got groceries with my kids. And so, but these things, we need to learn from our mistakes of the past and come up with a plan that looks at taking care of our farmers here in the U.S. and make sure that we can grow as much as possible and export it to those countries who need it, and look at other countries that we can depend on for our imports as well, and open up trade where we need it.
It's a good wake-up call for Americans. This food supply crisis is not something that is going to stay across the Atlantic and Eastern Europe. It is going to hit us here in the United States. Some people, some economists say that it already is. I want to ask you about this flurry of reporting we're now getting that Russian military personnel are sort of rounding up Ukrainians inside Ukraine, detaining them, and then forcefully deporting them to Russia. They're saying, the Russians and the Ukrainians both say 400,000 people so far have been sent forcibly to Russia, about 80,000 of them children. What do you make of that? Did you hear anything about that when you were on the ground?
We did not, but right upon my return, I started about 2 days later to hear those media reports and have been unable to verify that information, so I'm paying very close attention. This is very scary, and this is very reminiscent of World War II, both in the way that we're hearing about Ukrainians being removed from their home country, the disinformation. There are many Ukrainian and Russian families in my district that have family back home overseas, and some of those Russian families don't believe that there's war, their family in Russia, because of the disinformation and the fake news that Vladimir Putin puts on his televisions. And it's very scary and reminiscent of Adolf Hitler in World War II. And we're watching this all unfold in real time.
And the way that Nazis and fascists, you know, banged on people's doors, rounded up Jews in the middle of the night, all times of day, and forcibly deported them to other countries and kept them in camps. This is exactly what we are now hearing is happening inside Ukraine. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate the readout.
Thank you, Jillian.